Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the East Whiteland Township public hearing pertaining to the adoption of, consider adoption of the zoning map and sign text ordinance. I'd like to open up the meeting with just a short, quick pledge of allegiance. And then I would like to discuss some decorum issues because we've got so many people involved in this. So if we could begin with our pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty, and justice for all. I'm Scott Lambert. On the virtual meeting tonight will be Rich Orlow, Sue Drummond, Zach Weiner, and a host of our township staff folks as well. And I'm looking for the decorum wording, which has now escaped me here. Zach, if you've got it handy, if you can read it.
Sure. So just a few notes on public comment, since we do have a fair number of participants. Just ask that everyone rename themselves upon entering the meeting if you're able to, if you know how. Just helps us keep track of who's speaking. Please remain muted until the public comment period has opened following the presentation and the questions and comments from the Board of Supervisors. Prior to making a comment, please identify yourself using your name and your address so that our court reporter can include that information in the transcript. If you're commenting via Zoom, please use the raise hand feature, which can be found in the toolbar under the reactions category, sort of in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen likely. There's a small smiley face icon that helps you find that. If in writing, please send your comments to public comment, one word, public comment at eastwhiteland.org. Please speak clearly, keeping in mind that our court reporter is trying to keep track of the proceedings and the transcript. And we also ask that please keep your comments to no more than 3 minutes so that we can move efficiently through the public comment period and give everyone an ability to make their comment.
Thank you, Zach. At this point in time, I'd like to turn the proceedings over to our solicitor, Joe McGrory.
Thank you, Scott. Let me start by explaining what we're doing tonight. We're going to open the hearing to consider a zoning map change to rezone some township open space property over to professional office. And also as part of that hearing, we're going to consider a zoning amendment called a text change to permit billboards in the professional office district under certain conditions. At the end of that, after the applicant presents their arguments proposing these rezonings, then the public will have an opportunity to make public comment. That will be limited to just the sign on 202. At the end of that process, we're going to reopen another hearing. And the second hearing tonight is going to be to consider a settlement agreement for a sign that's going on Route 30. And again, the applicant will present its case and then to be followed by public comment and supervisors' comments. And then at the end of the night, the board is anticipating taking action on all of these matters. But they're going to be two separate hearings because they're two separate issues with two separate records. So with that, let me begin by explaining some of the history about how we got to where we are today. Approximately 2 years ago, the applicant approached the township about doing some creative types of billboards that you don't ordinarily see in the billboard industry. And the township had an interest in extending the Chester County Trail over top of Route 29 and started negotiating with the applicant on building that bridge, pedestrian trail bridge, and putting some outdoor advertising display on the side of that bridge. We were negotiating with the applicant for considerable time. And when he put pen to paper, he found that it was more expensive than he had anticipated and that the project was not financially feasible because of some of the constraints that were being placed on the bridge, such as it had to have vehicle access and so forth, that made the bridge more expensive than anticipated and the project not financially feasible. Shortly thereafter, the applicant filed 3 conditional use applications to put in 3 pylon signs on Route 30, 3 separate billboard applications, all permitted by conditional use. A conditional use is a use that is permitted under the zoning ordinance unless they cannot satisfy the criteria under the zoning ordinance that permits that use. We're in the middle of the process of conducting those hearings, and there's been a great public outcry against these billboards on Route 30. In an effort to satisfy the concerns of the residents through those conditional use cases, we sat down with the developer and attempted to negotiate some alternatives. The developer did look at Route 29, and we have looked at Route 29, but the developer doesn't have any interest in any parcels on 29 where he can put up a billboard. So what he had proposed was a monument sign on Route 29 and Route 30. The monument sign would be smaller than a standard size billboard, but bigger than what's permitted on Route 30. And it would have some pleasant architectural features attached to it that's more aesthetically pleasing than the standard 45-foot tall pylon sign that's being proposed as part of the conditional uses. In addition to that, the applicant is proposing a sign on Route 202. The applicant looked at several locations on 202 to see which signs are feasible, taking into consideration the PennDOT regulations and the contours of the road and right of way. The applicant had a site that was attractive to the applicant and proposed it to the township, but then the landowner would not agree to enter into a lease with the applicant. So the applicant looked for an alternative site, which is the site owned by the township, which is currently zoned open space. In order to put a billboard on any property, the property has to be zoned commercial in some fashion, such as professional office, or PennDOT would not issue a permit for the billboard. So discussions began about rezoning the township property to a district that would permit a billboard by PennDOT regulation. The township is not interested in any development of any open space parcels. They are not interested in any office buildings or any other kind of use permitted under professional office. They want the parcels to remain as open space, with the exception of this one billboard that's going on one of the open space parcels. In an effort to make sure that area remains as open space, the board asked me to draft a covenant that would run with the land in perpetuity, limiting all these parcels to open space in perpetuity, never to be changed by any future boards, and enforceable by every resident in the township to make sure it remains as open space in perpetuity, with the exception of the one billboard application. So that's a brief, condensed, and oversimplified history of how we got to where we are tonight. So with that, I'm going to recognize Thaddeus Barkowski, the applicant, to do a presentation on the first hearing. And I'm going to introduce into the record, we're going to do a joint hearing. The joint hearing is for the map amendment and also for the text change. The map amendment has some board exhibits, starting with Board Exhibit 1, which is the ordinance. Board Exhibit 2 is the legal notice of the hearing. Board Exhibit 3 is the proof of publication. Board Exhibit 4 is the submission to the Chester County Law Library. Board Exhibit 5 is the submission to the Chester County Planning Commission. Board Exhibit 6 is the submission to the East Whiteland Planning Commission. Board Exhibit 7 is the Chester County Planning Commission review letter. Board Exhibit 8 is the affidavit of posting with photos and map of posted areas. Since we're doing it as a joint hearing for both the map change and the text change, I'm introducing the following board exhibits as part of the text amendment. Board Exhibit 1 is the ordinance. Board Exhibit 2 is the legal notice. Board Exhibit 3 is the proof of publication. Board Exhibit 4 is a proof of submission to the Chester County Law Library. Board Exhibit 5 is the proof of submission to the Chester County Planning Commission. Board Exhibit 6 is the proof of submission to East Whiteland Planning Commission. Board Exhibit 7 is the Chester County Planning Commission review letter. So with that, I'll hand this off to Thaddeus Markowski, who will begin his presentation.
Thank you for the introduction and the background, Mr. McGrory. Thank you to the board and township staff for allowing us here this evening. I may start by sharing my screen if that's possible.
One moment. I'm going to make you a co-host, Thaddeus.
Thank you.
Excuse me, is Mr. Barkowski an attorney?
I am not.
Does he need to be sworn in, Mr. McGrory?
This is an informal hearing, so we're not getting sworn testimony.
Thank you again for the opportunity to be here this evening. This is to provide an overview of the proposed zoning map and the ordinance amendments by way of background to supplement Mr. McGrory's background and to add some clarification and some more detail possibly. The discussions with the municipality date back to 2015, more than a half a decade ago, when the first meeting was held with the then township officials on the potentiality of incorporating visual communication technology in the form of non-traditional outdoor advertising installations in the community. Then starting in 2016, there were meetings that were held with the township as well as county officials regarding the potential construction of a trail bridge over Route 29. We went through the lengthy and exhaustive process with the county on getting agreement on a development agreement. We did have an agreement with the county that would enable that project to move forward. And from our notes, somewhere along that process, the Board of Supervisors that was then in place did not want to move forward with the pedestrian bridge. Then we move into 2019, where we made application for 3 monopole billboard structures under a conditional use application on February 13th of 2019. Those 3 locations were R32 Lancaster Avenue, 104-106 Lancaster Avenue, 323 Lancaster Avenue. And I think it's very important to point out that those applications are in 100% conformity with the ordinance that was in place when they were filed. They do not require any variances. They do not require any other type of zoning relief in order to be constructed. In 2020,
Thaddeus, let me interrupt you for a second. In the beginning of your intro, you said the Board of Supervisors didn't want to move forward with the pedestrian bridge. There were some meetings held with the public at that time, and the public did not receive that proposal very well. So there was resident opposition that influenced the board into not going forward with it.
I would agree with that statement, Joe. Then we move forward into 2020 with the first conditional use hearing being held in January 15th. From that, there was opposition to the 3 monopoles, even though they were and are in conformity with the then ordinance that was in place. We then held a public feedback meeting at the Desmond Hotel. It was very well attended. That meeting was held on January 23rd, 2020. We then agreed to table the conditional use hearings while we worked in good faith to come up with a solution that the public and township staff and township officials felt that was more desirable for the community than moving forward with the township's own ordinance. So with that said, the existing off-premise sign regulations that are in place currently, which have since been amended from when we had filed for the 3 conditional use applications, the main tenets of that ordinance require that off-premise signs be located within 75 feet of the edge of Lancaster Avenue. They have to be within 2,100 feet of the township border. The maximum sign face area is 300 square feet for each sign face. The maximum sign height is 45 feet. And the dwell time is a minimum of 10 seconds. When you take a look at these tenets, as well as the other provisions of the ordinance that's currently in place, you have 2 general sections where off-premise signs are currently permitted. The first is here on the eastern edge of the township, between the township border and Old Lincoln Highway, in the areas that are identified in the light green color on both sides of Route 30. The second area falls between the edge of 202 and Phoenixville Pike on the western edge on both sides of Route 30, in the areas that are highlighted in the light green color. So today, the question being, how many billboards can be built along Route 30? In addition to the 3 locations on Route 30 that East Whiteland Outdoor has pending, there's 1 additional sign location that conforms to the current ordinance that's in place. That would bring the total number of monopole billboards that could be built along Route 30 to a total of 4. So amending the existing sign ordinance, there were several key objectives. One was considering the feedback of the majority of residents who voiced their concerns to the 3 applications along Route 30, primarily at the public information meeting that we had at the Desmond. There was very overwhelming and clear consensus that if the use of outdoor advertising signs was to be permitted somewhere in the township, that the overwhelming majority of people felt that it should be along a limited access highway, in this case, Route 202. We worked with the township to amend the ordinance. It's been a lengthy process that considered every conceivable option and every roadway that was viable for this type of use. The goal in creating this ordinance was to eliminate monopole billboards from ever being built on Lancaster Avenue besides the ones that are there. So when you look at the zoning amendment as it's been written, this is the same zoning amendment that has appeared before the East Whiteland Township Planning Commission, not only on 1 occasion, but on 2 occasions. One of those occasions was a 3+ hour meeting on the subject matter. In both of those occasions, the planning board recommended to the Board of Supervisors to approve the zoning amendment. You start with the existing professional office zoning that you can see to the upper part of the screen here, in the vicinity of 202 and Mill Lane. There are 6 parcels in question. They are outlined in green on the other side of 202, and you have the parcel numbers there that would be being rezoned professional office. When you look at the existing ordinance to the proposed ordinance, the existing ordinance limits signs to Lancaster Avenue, where the proposed ordinance would limit them to Route 202. The existing ordinance that's in place today has them being on a non-limited access roadway. The proposed ordinance limits them specifically to a highway or a limited access roadway. The number of potential signs that exist between the 3 that are pending plus the 1 under that could be in addition to those 3 is 4, and the proposed ordinance along Route 202 limits them to 2 signs. Under the existing ordinance, there is no specifications or requirements for dimming capability of the displays. Under the proposed ordinance that's in front of the board this evening, it requires automatic adjustment based upon ambient light, whether it's sunny, overcast, middle of the day, night, etc. Under the existing ordinance, there is no maximum daytime brightness or nighttime brightness for the displays. Under the proposed ordinance, there are limits on both. Those are limits that were the result of a lot of back and forth and consideration from the township's lighting engineer that they engaged in the drafting of this ordinance. The maximum illuminance under the existing ordinance has no specific maximum. It's 0.3 foot candles under the proposed ordinance. There is no requirement under the existing ordinance for the entity constructing a off-premise sign to use light mitigating technology. Under the proposed ordinance, it's a requirement. There is no maximum cap on the viewing angle of a digital display under the existing ordinance. Under the proposed ordinance, it's limited to 90 degrees. There is no public messaging requirement under the existing ordinance, but under the proposed ordinance, the municipality gets once every 2 minutes from each display in order to communicate with residents and visitors to the community in any way they desire. Under the existing ordinance, there are no architectural or design requirements in the construction of an off-premise sign, meaning that a sign could be built that would look like one of any number of the 16,000 outdoor advertising signs in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Under the proposed ordinance, there are architectural requirements to what can be built. When you go back to where outdoor advertising signs under this ordinance are permitted, they would be permitted in the PO district. And the next key provision is that they're permitted only on the south side of Route 202. So as you can see in this visual here, we black out the north side there of 202, where no off-premise signs would be permitted, given that provision. The next key provision is they have to be limited to within 75 feet of the right-of-way of Route 202. So you can see here that that blacks out a majority of the PO district and the parcels along Route 401 and limits it to that purple strip of 75 feet away from the right-of-way. The ordinance then adopts a PennDOT requirement, which requires any and all off-premise signs along a limited access highway to be located within outside of 500 feet from the ingress or egress of that highway. So from an on-ramp or an off-ramp. As you can see, that eliminates a large section of that purple area along 202. There's a requirement under the ordinance that the no off-premise signs be located within 500 feet of each other, and you end up with two potential locations to the far end of the parcels and to what would be the new PO zoning district. The light mitigating technology that was referenced before, the standard viewing angle when dealing with any of the leading manufacturers of this technology is in the 125 degree range. The light mitigating technology with a narrow viewing angle limits that to less than half at 60 degrees. What that does is any individual who is standing outside the 60 degree area would not be able to see any of the content being displayed from the installation. When you apply the light mitigating technology to the proposed location, you can see the location here on the aerial. And then you apply the 60 degree limits given the light mitigating technology. The placement of this installation here at these specific angles was done very carefully, and it was done so to eliminate people outside of that 60 degree area from being able to see any of the content being displayed from the installation. What you will notice is that limits the viewing area primarily to the highway corridor, and you have the wooded area on the other side of Route 202, and all of the residential dwellings that you see here are in an area that is outside the 60-degree viewable area. The architectural requirements on the ordinance, I think, are best illustrated by taking a look at a side-by-side video of two different outdoor advertising installations. On the left is a very traditional monopole sign structure that has been constructed by one of our competitors. There are, as I had referenced before, 16,000 of these in the state of Pennsylvania. On the right is a new type of installation that we were the first to build in the country. It was built on 4/22, a little bit more than 3 years ago. And as you can see here, the first thing that you will notice is that the typical structure on the left has an apron at the bottom of the display. That apron is anywhere from 3 to 4 feet in height, runs almost the length of the sign face. And beneath that apron, you can see the catwalk for people to be able to service it. You can see the safety rails on either end of that particular installation. On the installation that we've designed, the corners are rounded, so they have visually they are softer. The visual communication technology is encased in a frame that it is flush with that frame to provide a visual delineation between the frame and the visual communication technology. As you get to the internals of the structure, the differences are vast. As you can see here on the left with the standard structure, you have a long exposed torsion tube. You have steel I-beams running across the two sign faces that are structurally supporting it. You can see the catwalks from this particular aerial here. Under our design, the two pieces of visual communication technology are cantilevered on top of the center support. There is no cross I-beams, there is no vertical steel, and there's no long exposed torsion tube. As the video continues and you move around, you'll notice left the safety rail, the ladder to service the sign, none of those on our installation. And from the back, the differences are even more apparent. No vertical I-beams, no horizontal cross members, no ladders, a clean, fully encased and fully sealed rear sign design. So the type of structure that we would be proposing would be required to be constructed consistent with our structure that we had just shown you there. The aerial plan for the location, as you can see here, you have the paved cartway on 202. You have the sound barrier wall here. You then have this red line, which delineates the edge of the right-of-way. Everything to the upper part of that image within the red line is PennDOT right-of-way, and that's owned by PennDOT. The municipal parcel starts here, and the sign is tucked into the corner of that parcel below this thick tree cover that exists here. This particular location, in order to maximize the accuracy of any renderings, we went and used a relatively new technology that's been available for the last 2 years approximately, that enables us to do a 3D survey of the area. This 3D survey creates a wire diagram. That wire diagram can be seen here, and it accurately plots the dimensions and elevation of everything in the built environment: the paved cartway of the highway, the sound barrier walls, the existing tree cover, any overhead highway signs. Essentially, if it exists, it plots it in a three-dimensional format. Now, why this is important is that enables us to take the structural drawing of the sign and import it into this 3D scan, and it produces an exact representation of what the sign would look like in a wire diagram. We then take that wire diagram and we are able to then fill in that wire diagram in order to create a still image. So I want to start with a portion of the wire diagram. What you'll see is this is if you're traveling in a vehicle heading north on 202, approaching the sign face. The sign face is delineated by a green rectangle in order to create a contrast with the gray background color that's here. And what you're going to see is that this particular installation was sized at a height that it is just viewable above the edge of the sound barrier wall in order to create a sign that is only absolutely to the inch as tall as it needs to be in order to be safely viewed by motorists traveling north on 202. You can see that here, that it sits just above the edge of the sound barrier wall as you approach. And in fact, the bottom edge of the frame on the sign that I'd showed you before is actually obscured by the sound barrier wall. That is how tight the tolerances are on the sight lines of this particular installation at this particular height. This particular location would be located on municipal owned property. There would be a long-term lease in place for the operation of the sign. The annual rent for the sign is $50,000 in the base year. There are increases every 5% every 5 years, to the tune of 10%. All the insurance is the responsibility as the operator. The lease, in addition to the requirement of having a maintenance and operation agreement be executed, the lease gives the township control of what is displayed on the sign. So in the event there is something that was not specifically denoted in that operation and maintenance agreement, the municipality could ask the operator of the sign to take down any of that content. These are provisions that we've put into over 100 different installations. We've not once had to have a municipality pick up the phone or send an email and ask us to remove anything from an installation. The total township lease revenue over the life of this lease is just under $2 million. When you take that rendering from that wire diagram and you then fill in with an actual image on top of the wire diagram that gives you your specific dimensions, you create a rendering that is 100% accurate. This is a rendering of the proposed structure. The sign faces themselves are 672 square feet each. They are significantly smaller than some of the sign faces that you see along similar roadways such as this. Those sign faces can be as large as 1,200 square feet. There are many of them that are 960 square feet and 1,000 square feet. And that this here is rendered in at 672 square feet with a significant amount of accuracy. So the outcome, through this half a decade process, we've been able to accomplish a lot of reducing the number of billboards that could be built on Lancaster Avenue from today, which is 4, to 0. Relocating where billboards can go to Route 202, which is a high traffic, limited access highway, a place where billboards inherently belong. Reducing the number of signs that could be constructed in the township from 4 to 2, creating an income stream for the township totaling just under $2 million over the life of the lease, creating an ordinance that has extensive operational requirements and architecturally advanced construction requirements, and creating a solution that was the byproduct of the direct feedback from more than 100 residents throughout what was a lengthy and collaborative process with the municipality.
Thaddeus, this is Scott. Can
Yes,
I just comment on the first bullet point?
Sure.
Pertaining to from 4 to 0. Shouldn't that read 4 to 1?
No, this is reducing, this particular ordinance takes away the ability of any billboards to be built on Lancaster Avenue.
This ordinance, gotcha.
Yes.
I have a question, Thaddeus. It's Rich Orlow.
Yes, sir.
When you had the video of the wire diagram,
Yes.
you called it, heading north on 202.
Yes.
Is there a lane that assumes the vehicle is in? Because there's right lane, middle lane, left lane.
That particular video was taken, I believe, from either the middle lane or the left lane. Was certainly not taken from the right lane.
That's why I asked. I agree.
Yes. because that would change, obviously, to your point, that would change the requirements necessary from a height perspective, given the angle to the sound barrier.
Right. I guess one other question. Did you, when you're at the slide that shows the PennDOT right-of-way,
Mm-hmm.
the sound wall zigzags, but the right-of-way line goes straight.
So
Any idea why they did that?
the right-of-way line actually, according to our area here, zigzags almost in parallel with it. And I may be hard to see, but can you see my cursor, Mr. Orlow?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So I'm following the right-of-way line right here.
Oh, okay. I thought it was the green line
No,
closer to 202. Okay.
no, this here is sound barrier wall, and the right-of-way line virtually parallels the wall. 202 being a relatively newer highway, as we've seen with other newer highways, has larger right-of-ways in width than previous highways, so that any future expansion can be accommodated without the need for any additional condemnation.
Okay.
Thaddeus, you said that this ordinance allows 2 signs on 202, but just for the people who are listening in, we're covenanting that property so that it would only allow 1, correct?
That is my understanding.
Okay, didn't want people to be confused there.
In addition, I think the placement of this sign where it is, there's not enough room either direction to put another sign,
Could be, I don't
I
know.
believe.
Well, you can fit one more sign, but it would be on our property, and we're coveting our property to just 1 billboard.
I think actually the 2 locations were sort of a little bit to the east and west of the kink in the wall. So if there was one put more in the middle here, it may actually, by the nature of it, preclude one going a little further east. So once somebody puts one in, it'd be a lot tighter fit, well, at least.
I think the other thing to add to that, Mr. Orlow, is that if you'll notice the property line here, where my cursor is, continues going straight off the image. The adjoining property line keeps coming at an angle here, and it would merge at a point somewhere over this way. In order, under the spacing requirement, the sign would have to be located all the way at the point. But at the point, there isn't enough property width to construct any size sign without overhanging the right-of-way, which you're not permitted to do.
Right. One other question. You showed us a picture of the rear of the signs. Looks like they were pretty much silver colored.
Correct.
Are the rear of the signs ever shaded otherwise to blend in with the surrounding area? More like vegetation, are they, or can they?
Yes, your recollection is correct. The back of this design is completely sealed and silver in color. That finish can be done in any color. And in fact, I apologize for losing that screen there.
Right.
And in fact, my recommendation, given how heavily wooded the tree cover is, or how heavily wooded this area is that the inside of these 2 sign faces from this particular angle and the supports be finished in not only a color, but a color and possibly a pattern, as well as a finish that would be more matte in nature, not gloss in nature, that would do a very significant job of making it blended.
Kind of a forest camouflage look.
Yeah, essentially it would be a pattern, and to use the closest analogy, camouflage is the right way to do it, and finishing it in a matte finish that matches the coloration of the woodlands would, on top of the fact that there's a heavy tree buffer, go even further here. The one other thing,
I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Thaddeus.
yeah, the one other thing, Mr. Lambert, I wanted to add is the lease requirement for this location, by my recollection, requires us to plant evergreen trees at a minimum height of 20 feet, completely surrounding the base of the installation. So that would be in addition to any color changes that were done to mask the structure even further.
Does that picture on the right show a 20-foot tree? Is that, so you're kind of bringing it right up to the bottom of the sign itself?
Yes, in this particular case, by recollection, Supervisor Drummond, these were higher than 20 feet at this particular site. We spec'd 20-foot trees at this location in East Whiteland because the woodlands are so dense. And what we didn't want to do is spec a tree that requires a much larger root ball to be put in place, and then find ourselves jeopardizing some of the other root systems that are in the area. We can go as high as 40 feet at plant height that we've done successfully, most notably in Upper Dublin, Pennsylvania, along the Pennsylvania Turnpike. But we didn't want to disturb the root systems around it.
Yeah, there's no point in planting a tree and killing another, right?
I agree.
Okay.
So Thaddeus, you did answer the question that I was going to ask on the landscaping, but from the base of the sign to the base of the casing, what is that distance again?
From the, so you're asking from the base of the ground where the sign found monopole meets the ground to the bottom edge of the framing, is that correct?
Correct, yes.
I'm getting you that dimension right now. "32 feet.
And do you think that a 30-foot tree would also impact the surrounding vegetation versus a 20-footer?
The root ball size grows exponentially when you go above 20 feet in our experience. And so that was our concern with putting it at 20 feet. I have no problem of agreeing onto the record of getting the opinion of an arborist as to how large of a root ball can be placed given the location of the foundation without damaging any of the other root systems of adjoining trees, and then therefore maximizing that height of that tree that can be placed up to a height of 40 feet because you physically can't transplant beyond that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thaddeus, there's been some concern on the board about not knowing exactly what trees are going to be trimmed or eliminated. Can you outline for the board what your plans are in that regard?
Yeah, our plan is to create a access plan as well as a tree removal plan that, first of all, is as minimal as necessary in order to effectuate access to the site. This is the construction of a vertical sign. It does not require an extensive amount of laydown space in order to make that construction a reality. We have a vast amount of experience in constructing signs on properties that are vastly smaller and vastly more dimensionally constrained than this. So we would prepare that plan, and as a requirement in the lease, that plan would have to be approved by the municipality to their satisfaction before we would be able to access the site for any reason.
And do you envision cutting down any trees other than for an access drive?
I do not. And then the reason why I do not is the tree cover in the vicinity, as you get away, two things. As you move away from 202, the tree cover gets taller. And in addition to the tree cover getting taller, the grade of the ground increases in height from the paved cartway of 202 up past the sign structure heading to 401. So you have the visibility, therefore, is such that you wouldn't have to remove an extensive amount of trees in order to place the sign where it needs to go in order to be visible.
So you don't need to cut down any trees to gain visibility?
Based upon our analysis at this moment, without being able to mark any trees, the answer to that question is we don't believe that we're going to have to do so. But what we would be willing to do is, in the event, well, let's take a step back. For any trees that need to be cleared, whether it's for the foundation or for visibility, we would be willing to agree to a 2-to-1 replacement with the municipality directing us to the size, species, and location of where those replacements would grow.
I think we're very interested in knowing exactly what vegetation is going to have to come out, where the access driveway is going to be, maybe screening on 401 if it isn't sufficient naturally. Some of those things we still have some questions about. And I know you haven't designed it yet, so yeah.
I believe that the lease was created in a way that gives the township, as the underlying property owner, 100% control over the ultimate access plan and the ultimate forestry management plan that relates to the sign. And that's why we created it that way.
Okay.
As an aside, when you look at the competitors in our business, when it comes to the issue of trees, they're in the business of doing one thing, and that's cutting and removing. If you take a look at our projects over the last 10 years in our projects, and I'm doing this by recollection, but we've transplanted over 400 trees on sites that did not have any trees, not because we took down trees and had to replace them, but brought in 400 new trees to the sites that we do, and the minimum height of the trees that we brought into our sites was 20 feet. That's a significant amount of new forestry that we've added to communities throughout the tri-state area.
Yeah.
Thaddeus, if I can change gears just a second in terms of brightness of this sign.
Yes, sir.
We've brought in a lighting consultant who made recommendations and worked with you, and he came to an agreement and was comfortable with the conclusion, and you were comfortable with the recommendations that Scott made as well, correct?
Agreed.
Which is located in the lease agreement.
Those lighting requirements, if I recall, Supervisor Lambert, were incorporated into the ordinance.
Right.
And there's additional ones that were incorporated also into the lease agreement.
Right. There's actually also some flexibility going forward in the event that there are some adjustments that need to be made, correct? Going forward?
I believe that specifically there's a provision in the lease agreement that after the sign is constructed, if the township deems the daytime brightness in need of being reduced, that they can require us as the operator to reduce that daytime brightness once they've had an opportunity to view the sign functioning in full compliance with how the ordinance outlines the illumination requirements as well as the lease.
Would that also be for nighttime usage as well?
I don't recall that provision is incorporated for nighttime usage, and I believe the reason why it may not have been incorporated was the lighting expert did not take any issue with a 280 nit limit. But whatever the lease says as it relates to that issue, Supervisor Lambert, is what we've agreed to.
Okay. There was also a resident that you had worked with pertaining to making some adjustments to the angle of a 3-degree angle adjustment to the sign. Can you comment on that?
if I may here, this particular, the sign face in question, I believe that you're referencing, is for the one that's viewable to traffic traveling northbound on 202. As you can see here, you have the 60-degree line of sight. Given the light mitigating technology, the residence that's located right here, while the residence itself is outside the viewable area, given the light mitigating technology, there was a request by that owner to change the angle of the sign face, possibly to expand that further. We reviewed that. We corresponded with the property owner. We could change the angle of that sign face somewhat. That would increase the amount of the property that would be outside the viewable area by a fairly significant amount. It would increase it by over an acre on the owner's property, and we're prepared to do so if the property owner would like us to do that moving forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I know that some of the supervisors had some concern over the height. Do you have any specific questions or concerns over the height at this point?
No more. I mean, I think it was explained. I thought it was the reason given, which is because of the sound wall heading north on 202. So now I understand now.
Pretty amazing technology to let you do that. You have that little bit of tree just hanging there by itself. Okay.
Correct. Yeah, it enables a extremely accurate level of rendering into the frame.
At this point, does anyone on the board have any other questions?
No, I think that was clear.
I do not. Thank you.
At this point, we can open it up for public comment. And keep in mind, for public comment, we're only talking about the 202 sign. The Route 30 sign is going to be part of a hearing to follow this one.
So I do have one raised hand here. Make that 2, 3. I'll give everyone just a minute to go ahead and find the raise hand feature and raise their hands. In the meantime, I guess Gail, is that Gail Keys?
Yes.
Gail, if you'd like to make your comment.
Okay. Can you hear me? I mean, I'm unmuted, right?
Yes. Yep.
Thank you. I have 2 questions. I'm on the park board. I think I mentioned before about Ecology Park, one of my most favorite places to walk. I'm still concerned about being able to see light. I'm not talking about being able to read anything, but even being able to see light glow in the park. All right, maybe in the summer there's a lot of leaves on those trees, but now, you know, they're very bare. I didn't see in your little fancy video anything from that angle as to, to kind of calm my concern that the sign will be visible from the park. Can you comment on that to ease my concerns?
You're muted.
You're muted, Thaddeus.
Oh.
My apologies. That was me.
Okay.
Sorry about that, Gail. Okay, so try me one more time, the specific area where you're concerned about visibility, and I'm going to pull up an aerial of that.
Okay. You're familiar with the Ecology Park and the trail that goes around throughout the park?
Yes.
Okay. So that's where my concern is, as I'm walking that trail through there.
Okay, so couple things to take into consideration. So as you're coming, let's say, across the trail here, You are
We
at,
can't see it right now.
okay, hold on.
There you
Is
go.
that better?
Yes.
Okay, so as you're coming across the trail here, couple things. The sign is located a considerable distance from the edge of the paved cartway of 202. We also have the curvature of 202. So what that does is that forces the design of the sign. We call the industry calls the spread, which is the distance between the back of the two sign faces that forms the V, to be more significant than just a back-to-back sign. That inherent reality has that anybody or anything behind the sign is going to benefit from that angle. That's the first thing. The second thing is the requirement of the ordinance to specifically use the light mitigating technology means that anybody past this line is not going to be able to see anything on the particular sign face, whether it's the one viewable to traffic traveling north or traveling south. The third thing that I'd point out is the standards that have been put in place in this particular ordinance as it relates to lighting based upon the township's lighting consultant are the same standards that we've used in a vast number of municipalities. Those standards have proven without this particular spread, without the light mitigating technology that we're referencing, to conform to the residential lighting requirements when we have a particular location that's just 7 feet from the edge of a residential property line. And the last thing that I'll leave you with is the tree cover that is behind the sign up until the edge of 401 is pretty significant. So it's a combination of factors that go a long way to obstructing any adverse effects from the displays when you're traveling in that particular vicinity.
Can you show me with your arrow where the actual trail through Ecology Park is?
The Ecology Park Trail or the Chester Valley Trail? Chester
The
Valley Trail.
No, the Ecology Park Trail.
On this area, I can't zoom in on this aerial.
I think it's in the far left corner. Go all the way to the corner.
Over here? You mean over here?
That would be the far eastern end of that trail. That is, if you'd like, I could bring up
That's the
Chester views or
sewage,
something to
that's
that
the
effect.
sewage pump station right there, right?
Correct.
Correct.
Is where? Can somebody point to it for me with some
Lower
kind
left corner, lower left corner
of the
of the
Oh, there.
display.
Okay, right. So that's all in the whole park. Ecology Park is in the viewing area, correct?
Correct, but you have tree cover. Yeah, yes, that's correct.
Part of
Yeah,
it.
but couple things. You have an extensive amount of tree cover that exists here. Much of these trees that are in this vicinity here are significantly taller than the sign. Second thing is when you saw that wire diagram that was taken at this distance here, that wire diagram starts just past the overpass here. That distance away is, by recollection, is just around 1,000 feet. So into Ecology Park, you're moving past 1,000 feet. The emphasis of my point being is that these displays are sized in a way that they can't be viewable beyond a distance of around 1,000 feet. And so this distance over there is further away than that. And on top of that, you have the tree cover that exists not only here, but on the other side of the road.
And so no, not even any glow or anything.
No, and here's why. Because the way the lighting standards are requiring it, it's only 0.3 foot candles above ambient light level. Said differently, we're talking 30% of the light that comes from one candle at a distance of 1 foot away. There's vastly more lighting that comes from a parking lot light at the sewer treatment facility here. There is exponentially more lighting that comes from a car's headlight. There is exponentially more lighting that comes from a traditional static sign that has an external fixture wherein the light is reflecting off of the sign face. So given the distance, given the tree cover, given the light standards, you're not going to have an adverse impact at that distance away in that particular vicinity.
Is there any noise situations associated with any of this?
No,
Or-
the signs don't produce any noise. They have cooling fans in them that you can't hear when you're standing beneath the sign structure, directly beneath it. So
Is there any
there's no noise.
concerns to wildlife? I mean, birds flying around. I mean, nothing that would drive them away, or, I mean, there's so many pretty birds in that park, and, you know, so.
Well, I can tell you our maintenance crews on other sign structures had to take nests out of our different sign structures at different times, and obviously doing them at the time of year when those nests were not being utilized. So I think that's an empirical period of evidence that birds have decided to be close to those particular signs. I can tell you this: there's no studies that I'm aware of that have raised any adverse wildlife impact from the implementation of this type of technology.
My other question is, it seems to me in the prior meetings that there was some discussion of some improvements to Ecology Park with this. I'm not just talking about the planting of trees that kind of comes along with the construction, but just additional improvements. Has that conversation been developed any further? Maybe that's a question for the township or you, either one.
I'm not aware of us having any discussions about contributions to Ecology Park, no.
Wasn't that discussed at a prior one of these meetings that?
Not, Gail, not to my knowledge.
I don't recall either. Gail, what was thought of by way of an improvement? I mean, it's a pretty,
Well, yeah, I don't know that anything specific. It just seemed to me that there was discussions that there would be some considerations of improvements. So there was a lot of information tossed around. I just thought
There
I had
was a discussion. Yeah, there was a discussion at a previous planning commission. Mr. Barkowski had advised that he would be willing to do some improvements around the base of the sign, which I think is more consistent with what he talked about tonight, you know, sort of the immediate area. And then we discussed that, you know, if there were to be a possibility for something like that, the park board could be involved in that discussion. And admittedly, that has not occurred. So I think what Mr. Barkowski has discussed here this evening is probably more in line with what that would be than, say, you know, physical improvements you might think of from like park improvements, like a pavilion or benches or trails and things like that. I think the intent of that comment was more about not impacting the surrounding area more than necessary.
Okay, thank you. That's it for my questions.
Thank you.
Next public comment?
So next up is Martin Lutz.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Okay, great. Good evening. My name is Martin Lutz. I live at 4 Lap Road, Malvern, Pennsylvania, 19355. First of all, I'd like to state that a significant portion of my property would be in the viewable area associated with not only the applicant's proposed electronic billboard within the township's rezoned land, but also the viewable area associated with any future electronic billboards built within the rezoned land. My property is in the adjacent residential R1 zoning district and is adjacent to the township property proposed to be rezoned, separated only by the US 202 right-of-way. Second, it is misleading to suggest that there was great public outcry, opposition to the proposed Route 30 billboards. The opposition, for the most part, was from residents in the vicinity of the proposed Route 30 billboards. It is unfair and proper that residents in neighborhoods surrounding the Ecology Park were not allowed to be a party of legal standing in the conditional use hearings in regard to the Route 30 signs, or otherwise made aware, until recently, of the contrived deal emanating from those hearings, which would negatively impact the expansive Mill Lane Route 401 residential and open space area of the township. It was mentioned in the presentation there was opposition from 100 residents. I can lay you odds that there's more than 100 residents in the area of the Ecology Park surrounding residential neighborhoods in opposition to what is taking place. And part that's evidenced by, if you look at the number of participants in the meeting tonight, it's 66. 3, I would ask the Board of Supervisors, what are the implications to the settlement agreement as to signs along Route 30? The township does not approve the rezoning of the township's 19.45 acre open space and Ecology Park land. And if the township does not approve the proposed off-premise sign ordinance. That's a question.
I don't understand the question.
Is the question, Marty, if this is not approved tonight, what happens to the Route 30 signs applications?
To the settlement agreement.
Uh,
By way of reminder, at the December 15th, 2020 Planning Commission meeting, I asked a similar question. And I believe the applicant's response was that he would simply proceed with the construction of the route, the proposed Route 30 conditional use signs. So I'm repeating the question tonight to get a better understanding.
I think Marty answered your own question. If this zoning doesn't go through, then the settlement agreement doesn't go through and he just proceeds with his conditional use hearings.
Is that the understanding of everybody involved here?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
yes.
Okay. I'm going to, I had a number of other questions, but I'm going to summarize it into one. Could the board please explain how the rezoning of the 19.5 acres of open space in Ecology Park land from open space to professional office is consistent with 1, the township's comprehensive plan, 2, the township's park recreation and open space plan, and 3, the county's comprehensive plan, landscapes 3, all of which call for preserving, expanding open space, protecting corridors, communities to recreational parks, historic resources, trails, national areas, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess I'm asking the board, how is this in any way consistent with those 3 plans?
Marty, at this point, it's time for public comment, and that doesn't include a question and answer period. Please state all your concerns, and at the end of your statement, if the board wishes to address something, they will.
I'm a little surprised because I don't know how else I get a better understanding if I can't ask questions at this point.
I'll just give your entire presentation, and then the board can comment as they deem appropriate.
The answer is the net effect of the covenant. The covenant retains open space and can be enforced by every resident of the township.
That covenant actually is tighter and stronger and will lead the open space area into perpetuity rather than leaving it the way it is now. 6 years, 7 years down the line, another board could come in and rezone for whatever reason. This covenant will prohibit that, Martin, from occurring. This open space will remain open space for as long as we're around and beyond. It tightens it down.
I hear that, Scott, but let's put it this way. The township doesn't have the greatest track record for coming up with good sign ordinances. That's how we got here, because we screwed up with the sign ordinances in the past. And the other aspect is, from a resident standpoint, it's sort of this covenant is sort of like a Rube Goldberg contraption. He was the cartoonist who came up with these machines to do a simple task in a very complicated, circuitous manner. But anyway, moving on.
If I could just add one thing, that so public and private not-for-profit open space and recreational uses are a permitted use in the PO district. Just want to make sure everyone is aware of that relative to the actual zoning.
Zach, could you put up the one exhibit that I forwarded to you called EWT number 2?
Yes. Give me one moment here. I apologize for the hold up. Are you able to see my screen? Is this the Chester County Review Letter? Martin, is that what you're looking for?
If we go to the last page, down to page 4, I believe it is. Throughout that letter, I highlighted pertinent sections in yellow, but the most important one is the recommendation where Chester County is recommending that the township consider other areas that be more appropriate locations for off-premises signs. Wanted to highlight that point. And while you're at it, Zach, could you put up EWT number 3? And could you go back to the header on this? This is a letter from the Great Valley Wastewater Company to the township back in 1974, where the company, once it phased out its private sewer plant and the township went on to public sewers, made the point, if you go down to the first paragraph, Zach, the first paragraph, where they indicate their intent to turn the land, 9 acres, basically represents the Ecology Park, turn it over to the township for use, quote, as parkland or open space, end of quote. I think gives some history to how the township acquired that land.
The land that the sign is actually going on was not part of this transaction. That was Joe Rubino and his family donating it to the township. And there was no restriction that it be open space.
Well, the land is part of the rezoning to professional
It is
office.
part of rezoning, but the proposed use is not on the property associated with this letter.
Okay, not,
And the other thing I would add to that is that the use of this property isn't actually changing. There's no intention from the township to allow the Ecology Park, the actual park proper, to be used as anything but a park or open space in its current form with trails, parks, benches, things like that. So
I understand that, but boards change, things change, time goes on, and the township in the past has previously tried to change the use of this property. Specifically back in 1991, they wanted to make this property, the Ecology Park, into a regional leaf composting facility. And I have the engineering survey or plan by Surinder Kohli, which shows that.
Yeah, but the covenant that's being proposed by the township will impose a restriction upon the property that it be only open space, period. No other development on the property whatsoever, just open space. And that will run in perpetuity until the end of time, enforceable by every resident in the township. So a future board cannot change that. A future board can't put these properties to any use other than open space. So you don't get a better protection than a covenant. That's far more powerful than zoning. It's far more powerful than what the Board of Supervisors in the future would be able to do.
I hear that, Joe, but please accept the fact that residents are a little hesitant at this point in time, given the history of what's taken place here. Before I read a statement of opposition here, I'd like to touch upon a comment. I guess it was a question you raised, Scott, and Thaddeus answered about the rotation of the sign, viewable area, et cetera, et cetera. I was wondering if Thaddeus could put up on the screen there the viewable, non-viewable aerial diagram.
I can do that.
There it is. Okay. A while back, assuming that the township was going to approve the rezoning and the new sign ordinance, I contacted Thaddeus and suggested to him if that sign could be slightly rotated, it would not only be a benefit to my property by making less of the property in the viewable area, but also would be a benefit to properties over in Deer Run Lane, because their backyards would not be in the viewable area. If you look at the yellow line on the right-hand side of the screen, if you carry that line all the way over to the right margin, you can see it runs through the backyards of homes in Deer Run Lane. So I propose that that sign was rotated to maintain that 60% angle that Mr. Barkowski referenced. It would accomplish a number of things. One, the backyards of all those homes in Deer Run Lane would no longer, anyway, portions of them would no longer be in the viewable area. Less of my property be in the viewable area. And still there would be the entirety of Oak Glen would be protected by being in the non-viewable area. Now, Mr. Barkowski said he could do that, but he wanted me to sign off on all my rights related to this whole situation. I refused to do that, and I still do. However, I'm throwing it to the board that you're in a position now to accomplish something with such a minor change that would impact just not me to the benefit, but also to the residents of Deer Run Lane. Any comment?
If I may comment so I can understand, Mr. Lutz, the sign face that you asked us to rotate, was it the sign face viewable to traffic traveling north on 202 or south on 202?
Traveling north.
So how does changing the angle of the sign face that is to traffic traveling north on 202 affect the angle of the sign face that's viewable to traffic traveling south on 202, since the two sign faces are independent of each other?
All right, I assume they were interdependent. You're saying they're not.
No, they're not.
Can they both be rotated though?
They can both be rotated, but there is effects of rotating both of the sign faces. And so the angles that have been proposed here accommodate all of the residential dwellings within the vicinity of anywhere even remotely close to the sign. There's not a single residential structure within 2,000 feet that is in the viewable zone based upon the way the angles of these two sign faces have been situated. And in fact, this specific location was selected, and the angle of these sign faces was reviewed ad nauseum for that specific reason.
Let me ask this question. How do you get the viewable, non-viewable line of demarcation out of the backyards of the people in Deer Run Lane?
You can rotate the sign face, the sign face that's viewable to traffic traveling south, but then it would have an effect on the other side of the equation.
Meaning?
And in fact, the homes on Deer Run Lane are through the tree cover, across the Chester Valley Trail, and at a distance that's more than 2,000 feet away. The sign isn't even designed to be viewable at 1,000 feet away.
To the other side then of rotating the sign so that more of my property would not be in the viewable area, what can be done?
We agreed to do that.
All
But
right.
you took a position that even if we agreed to accommodate your request, even though it was going to adversely impact the viewable distance because it would have cut off some of the drivers, that you still wanted to preserve your right to challenge us as it relates to this sign or any other sign in the township. So why are we going to change the angle of a sign face, which we agreed to do in my email to you, that all the board members and township staff were copied on, that we were going to accommodate your request, but you wanted to preserve the right to pursue litigation against us. So why am I going to change the angle of the sign face so it has an adverse impact on motorists?
Maybe that's the right.
Excuse me,
so you can
excuse
continue.
me. Hold on. This is the court reporter. I'm getting a lot of feedback. Can everyone make sure that they're muted, please?
Also, just ask that everyone be cognizant that Elaine is trying to keep track of the record here, and that, to the extent that we can slow down and make sure there's not too much back and forth going on, that she can accurately capture that.
Maybe I took that position simply because I thought that was the right thing for you to do. There's no sweat off your nose.
No, in fact, it is. It adversely impacts the viewable distance of the sign face to motorists traveling north on 202. But we were willing to do that to accommodate your request. You, in turn, said, but I still want to be able to pursue my legal action against you. So we're not going to act in good faith with you to adversely impact our installation, to accommodate you, to only leave the door open for you to pursue litigation against us. It's called bad faith, Mr. Lutz.
No, the bad faith isn't your part, Mr. Bartkowski. Let's stop playing games with the words here. You haven't acted in good faith yet. Moving on.
Mr. Lutz, I'm not going to have you insult me on the record without me responding. This process has been going on for a half a decade in the municipality. The board members and township staff have spent an exhaustive amount of time to place a sign on a limited access highway in a vicinity that doesn't affect your residents or any other neighboring residents. So for you to somehow insult me that this has been in bad faith is a fallacy.
I'll state it again. The residents in this area were not aware of what's taken place. You negotiated a deal with the township in bad faith, knowing that the residents in this area were unaware of what was taking place. We're reacting to what is taking place. So yes,
There were-
I
There
will
were
maintain.
countless meetings on this subject matter. There was a 3-hour planning board meeting where you dominated most of the meeting at that time. There was plenty of participants in that meeting. There's been countless correspondence with residents, yourself included.
As of December 15, 2020, at the planning commission meeting you're referring to, the deal was done. Residents were reacting because we found out about it. The residents in the area of the Ecology Park were never allowed to be a party of legal standing in the conditional use hearings. We were cut out of it. So yes, I'll maintain my position. You were acting in bad faith, period. I would like to move on. Mr. McCrory.
You were wrong, Mr. Lutz, and I'll maintain my position. And if you continue with your slanderous actions, then I would be happy to pursue a claim against you for that.
That is not slanders. I believe, and I'll say it again, that you were acting in bad faith.
I'll be able to demonstrate to the court that through a half a decade of
Gentlemen.
transparent discussion with the municipality.
Back on track.
Gentlemen, let's stick to the hearing, and
Okay.
you two can debate your differences in whatever form you want to, but let's leave this up to the rezoning.
Joe, you had indicated earlier that you wanted to limit questions and now is not the time for questions. I state my position. I had any number of additional questions to ask, but I will do this. I will simply state my position in a form of a statement of complete and total opposition to what is taking place. So if I may read that, it may be a little lengthy, but I think it'll end the discussion on this.
Okay.
Mr. McGrory, what happened to 3 minutes?
It's
This
up
is a
to us.
public,
It's up
What
to
happened to
us.
3 minutes, Mr. McGrory?
Thaddeus, it's up to us to enforce the 3-minute rule, not
And
you.
my
And
question
the
is,
The
what
chair
happened
has the
to 3 minutes?
discretion to extend someone more than 3 minutes. This gentleman just wants to read a statement. Read the statement, and we'll get on to the next person.
answer to what Mr. Zugalski just raised. All the legal notices for what's taking place tonight stated that any citizen will be provided the full opportunity to be heard. I also refer to section 200-120 of the zoning code, which states opportunity to be heard. At a public hearing, full opportunity to be heard shall be given to any citizen and all parties with legal standing of interest.
Yeah, I don't believe we're denying you that opportunity, so.
No,
please
you're not.
proceed with
You're not.
your statement.
Joe, you were not. I was just reading that from the standpoint of what Mr. Zugalski was trying to cut me off. All right, I hereby place on record my statement in complete and total opposition to the township's ill-conceived plan. The reasons in support of my opposition include.
Excuse me, Mr. Lutz. Can you
Yes.
please slow down and speak clearly?
All right, I hereby place on record my statement in complete and total opposition to the township's ill-conceived plan. Reasons in support of my opposition include, but are not limited to, the following. 1, a significant portion of my property would be in the viewable area associated with not only the applicant's proposed electronic billboard within the township's rezoned land, but also the viewable area associated with any future electronic billboards built within the rezoned land. My property is in the adjacent residential R1 zoning district and is adjacent to the township property proposed to be rezoned, separated only by the US 202 right of way. It is unfair and improper that residents in the neighborhood surrounding the Ecology Park were not allowed to be a party of interest in the conditional use hearings in regard to Route 30 signs, or otherwise made aware until recently of the ill-conceived deal emanating from those hearings, which would negatively impact the expansive Mill Lane, Route 401, residential and then open space area of the township. 3, the township is acting with indifference and total disregard of the fact that the land proposed to be rezoned from open space to professional office was donated to the township by Anthony J. Volpe in 1974, specifically, quote, for use as parkland or open space, end quote. 4, The township's open seat plan is contrary to and inconsistent with the township's comprehensive plan, the township's park recreation and open space plan, and the Chester County Comprehensive Plan, which states, among other things, quote, expand the countywide network of protected open space through conservation corridors that connect communities to recreational parks, historic resources, trails, and natural areas, while protecting stream and wildlife corridors. Chester County Planning Commission review letter dated January 8th, 2021 recommends that the township consider other areas that would be more appropriate locations for off-premise signs, such as the Route 29 corridor. 8, the proposed off-premise sign ordinance, which according to township officials was proposed by the applicant, is seriously flawed and lacking the provisions to protect the residents. A, Chester County has published a document entitled Signs, Digital and Electronic Sign Regulation, which states in regard to electronic signs, quote, regulation by conditional use or by special exception, as opposed to allowing them as by right uses, is preferable because this will allow the municipality to impose reasonable conditions on approvals according to the provisions of the Pennsylvania Municipalities Planning Code. Consistent with this, the current township sign ordinance requires conditional use and not by right approval. However, the township has ignored this important protection for the residents and failed to incorporate it in the new sign ordinance. B, the current sign ordinance states that off-premise signs can only be lit from dusk to 10 p.m. if adjacent to residential zoning districts. The township has ignored this important protection for the residents and failed to incorporate it in new sign ordinance. This is particularly egregious on the part of the township, and that the proposed US 202 electronic billboard would be surrounded by open space and residential R1 zoning districts. C, the current sign ordinance states that off-premise signs cannot exceed 300 square feet in area. The proposed sign ordinance completely abandons this important restriction and more than doubles the allowable sign area.
Excuse me, Mr. Lutz did not understand that.
Okay, I'll read it again. Thank you.
Thank you.
The current sign ordinance states that an off-premise signs cannot exceed 300 square feet in area. The proposed sign ordinance completely abandons this important restriction and more than doubles the allowable sign area to 672 square feet. Charles Township, for signs along the turnpike, and Tredyffrin Township for signs along US 202 restricts sign area to 300 square feet. The Chester County review letter states the township should consider the rationale for proposing to increase the maximum area for off-premises signs, which is considerably larger than typically permitted by many other municipalities. D, the current sign ordinance prohibits more than one off-premise sign per tract. The township has ignored this important protection for the residents and failed to incorporate it into the proposed sign ordinance. E, the current sign ordinance states that the electronic display of a sign may not change more frequently than one time every 10 seconds. Township has substantially degraded this protection to 8 seconds in the proposed sign ordinance. F, a proposed site ordinance does not require an environmental impact statement in regard to such matters as the number of trees to be cut, wetlands, steep slopes, riparian buffer, and the proximity to Valley Creek, an exceptional value stream. G, proposed site ordinance is lacking in enforcement measures to ensure that the conditions of municipal approval are observed, etc. In summary, I strongly oppose the township's ill-conceived plan. I would urge the board to put a stop to this travesty. Township's proposed rezoning of the township's 19.45 acre open space and ecology park land near Mill Lane, professional office, and a proposed new site ordinance, which would allow the construction of excessively large electronic billboards within the rezoned land, would do irreparable harm to the distinctive character of the township and quality of life of the residents. And I thank the board and giving me the time to read my comments into the record. Thank you.
Okay. Next public comment?
Looks like next up on my list here, I apologize if this is out of any sort of chronological order, but next up I show as Tim Caban.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I have a couple of questions and comments, and if you don't want to answer the questions, it's up to you, so I'll just read it. But I have an observation that the original code was changed to allow what was said by Mr. Leach, the zoning agent at the time, of one sign to allow 3 signs. And my question is now, if you do the settlement agreement, aren't we left? And if we do the settlement agreement and you allow Mr. Barkowski to, or he agrees to extinguish 3 sites, aren't we left with then 1 sign? And doesn't that then leave the township open to being sued by other sign companies who are not bound by the agreement under what I believe, and I'm not a lawyer, but I believe Mr. McGrory called that something like a du jour challenge, which is with regard to not having enough signs in the township. So I hope that this settlement agreement would not lead us into a situation where not only do we have the new sign, but we're open to more signs. And I don't know if Mr. Barkowski wants to answer that or not.
Yeah, I'm going to answer that. The zoning ordinance permits 2 signs. The landowner will only agree to 1 sign, that being the township, but there's 2 signs that are permitted on township property. The covenant will stop future owners of the property from doing a second billboard, but the zoning does not. The zoning would still permit 2 signs. So that's why it's not an issue or subject to challenge.
What is the second sign besides this sign that's being proposed?
On the same property, just 500 feet away.
On the property that we're looking at on this map right now?
Yes.
There's a billboard, other billboard on that property?
No, you can put in 2 billboards. We're electing to only put in 1 and covenant away the ability to put in a second one in perpetuity.
Okay.
So it's our own voluntary actions as a landowner to not elect to use our rights to put in a second billboard. It is not a zoning ordinance that prohibits you from doing it. That's a distinction that negates any theory of spot zoning.
Okay, but my question wasn't about spot zoning. It was the not having enough billboards of du jour, right?
Well, no, it's a spot zoning argument.
Okay.
But go on with your comments.
Okay. And my other question is the sites that are going to be extinguished. Does Mr. Barkowski, did he buy those and own those and extinguish them? Or is he under some type of contract to buy them? And then under the settlement agreement, he could back out of ownership of those properties at a later date.
I don't know what his rights are to those properties. I know that he is standing to bring the conditional uses. I don't know whether leases or fee simple or anything else. But the zoning, if he withdraws the 3 conditional uses and we change the zoning tonight, there won't be any billboards permitted on Route 30 then.
Even if another sign company decides to sue and becomes owner of those properties, if he were to back out the ownership.
That's right, because the ordinance would have changed.
All right.
We're changing the ordinance tonight to not have billboards on Route 30.
Okay. I just want to observe in the letter from the Planning Commission that they use, it's section 3, page 2 of the letter from the Planning Commission that is titled Adjacent Zoning. And it then goes on to mention that the land on the south side of Conestoga Road, east of Mill Lane, is zoned R1 low residential. The land on the south side is institutional or R1. The land on R2 Mill Lane is PO, and the east of Mill Lane is R1. I would like to observe that the Planning Commission has no hesitation about using the word adjacent with regard to those zoning districts, because that is something that maybe it was only Mr. Lambert who gave voice to it, but he mentioned something on the last call about that would be a different definition of the word adjacent than we're using. And I think it's important that we observe that not only are the citizens rightly using the word adjacent, so is the Planning Commission. And that also relates, because that relates, the word adjacent relates to what happens if you don't do the settlement agreement. Because under section 200-85, letter D, if you are adjacent to a residential tract, then letter D says, if adjacent to residential zoning districts, signs shall be lit only from dusk to 10 p.m. And Mr. Barkowski has his lawyer has repeatedly said that he can build that sign by right, and he doesn't need any approvals. I think is what his lawyer said. And so if that's the case, then he should be held to that code section, which clearly says that the sign shall only be lit from dusk to 10 p.m., which means he has to have it off the rest of the time. I would also like to ask the question, because Mr. Barkowski again said that he's been talking to the township for over half a decade, and half a decade includes the time period when the code was changed the first time. So, Mr. Barkowski, were you talking to the township at the time they changed the code at that time in 2017?
Come on, continue on with
No
that.
answer. Okay. So I would just like to observe that not only is the Board of Supervisors, who specializes in overriding the township code and not upholding it, you're going to be, with this settlement agreement, you're going to override the wishes of the community. You're going to override section 200-85D of the zoning code, and you're going to override a very strong letter from the Planning Commission. And my final statement is, when do we finally stand up in this township for anything at all? When do we fight? Or do we just constantly lay down for every developer, every stripe of person that comes through with a threatened lawsuit, and we never fight back? I really hope you could consider that. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Who's up next, Zach?
So like next up is Lynn Diethorne. I apologize if I mispronounce your last name.
Ma'am, you're muted. And also, could you state your full name and spell your last name, please?
So she is not muted. I don't see any activity on her microphone. Ma'am, if you want to click down in the microphone mute button and try to click the small arrow in the top right corner of that, You may be able to connect to a microphone. Maybe that you're just not connected to a microphone at the moment. In the meantime, I'm going to move on to the next commenter here. We have, let's see here, Jonathan Weiner. Jonathan, would you like to make your comment?
Of course, and first off, thank you for the opportunity. Jonathan B. Weiner, Esquire. I live at 11 Mill Creek Lane, and it is actually right near the proposed place. So I'm a relatively new resident. I've moved here just about a year ago. I have a 1.5-year-old son, and one of the main reasons why I moved to Chester County was because of things not like this happening. I do not see the need for this type of development in beautiful Chester County. This is a wonderful wooded area that was deeded to the county many, many years ago, specifically to keep things like this from happening. You know, I look at some of the background of the Board of Supervisors who we, the people, elected, and one of their profiles says his goal is to enhance open space, slow the current pace of development, scrutinize planned growth, improve township outreach channels to enhance communication with the community and improve community collaboration in township development decisions. That flies directly in the face with what I'm seeing here tonight. We were elected these people to protect us, to protect our green spaces. So this gentleman is left just about 2 years ago, and now he wants to put up a huge billboard in our protected green space. Keep Chester County beautiful, keep it green. We don't need this $50,000 every single year. That's a pittance to Chester County in our township. So with that, thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next, Zach. No, you're muted, Zach.
Of course I am. Next up, we have a Mike Matkovich. Mike, would you like to make your comment?
Yeah, sure. Good evening, everybody, and thanks for your time. I really just have a brief comment, and it's related to the December 15th Planning Commission meeting, where we heard from the president of East Whiteland Fire Company, Gary Sheraton, and he stated that the highest area of incidents are within the proposed location of 202, and he expressed concern that the billboard, you know, could potentially create distraction that could put first responders' lives at risk. And I just think his comments should be taken serious and with more thoughtful consideration. I know Thaddeus had referenced some national studies. I'm not sure if the board had a chance to review those or look at alternate studies. But I do think that, you know, his comments, again, should be taken serious and with more thoughtful consideration. I mean, in the end, we're really just talking about, you know, changing Ecology Park zoning, you know, to accommodate a billboard for, you know, 50 grand a year. So that's my comments, and I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Thank you, Mike. Next up is Lynn. I think you were able to connect to a microphone. Would you like to make your comment?
Can you hear me this time?
Yes.
Terrific. I'm glad you can hear me. Again, my name is Lynn Diethorne. I live at 14 Whitewoods Lane, Malvern in East Whiteland Township, and I'm near the border of East Whiteland Township. West Whiteland is right next to me as I live off Phoenixville Pike. I just wanted to bring to the attention to the people in the meeting today and to our community that right now on 202, as you drive from King of Prussia to Westchester, there are actually no billboards. I mean, there are no advertising billboards on that road. And it's really a nice drive to have in that way. In our community, we drive on other roads like that. The Blue Route is actually a scenic byway and designated as such by the state of Pennsylvania, and portions of the Exton bypass starting where Route 202 comes into Route 30 to almost Downingtown is also a scenic byway. And as such, they're restricted from having outdoor advertising. I actually propose that our township with the other townships along Route 30 work together to make 202 a scenic byway and to bar any outdoor advertising on it and to preserve the look of our community. I think it's important aesthetic appeal as we drive along this road to the look of the community, where we can see, yes, we have some barriers and there's some places where we can see shopping centers, but generally it's a lot of land that we see, and it's a nice drive, and it's unfettered by having advertising shoved in our face. So I'm making that proposal to ask East Whiteland to join with me and our legislators who I reached out to start working to make 202 a scenic bypass. Secondly, I'd like to say I'm an outdoor person, an avid runner and road biker. I use the Chester Valley Trail and I use other roads near me. This company under the guise or under another name is actually proposing another billboard on 202 right near me on Dunwoody Drive, another area which I frequent. And actually has similar circumstances in an area that has a portion of the Valley Creek, in the Valley Creek watershed, also where there's animals and other wildlife that live there. And there is an environmental impact to the lands when they come in there and they go to put these billboards in. They do try, they'll say they're trying to minimize that. I'm not doubting that they may try to, but whenever you go into these areas to build, you do have an environmental impact. And I think it's important that a third party puts together environmental impact statements to these areas. At the last West Whiteland meeting that I attended for the Planning Commission, Frank Donahue, who's actually an East Whiteland resident, but also part of the Valley Forge Trout Unlimited, talked about the importance of the Valley Stream watershed and runoff and how that affects the area. So it's really important. I can't tell by the way of looking at this diagram where exactly this stream is compared to where that board is, or how the construction would affect that, or any other living creatures in that area. I mean, I don't know, there could be bog turtles living there. I have no idea. I've not actually used that particular area, but I do use the Chester Valley Trail. I do run and walk up Dunwoody Drive, and it's sad. Like, I go outside to have and enjoy these quiet areas of our environment that are the outdoors, and now I'll be looking at a billboard. And I'll also be looking at it when I drive on 202, and it's really detracting from our community and what we want our communities to be. And I think there's outstanding, a lot of people that just don't want this to happen in our community. It's being forced down our throats through the way of state zoning, which actually community members don't believe in. And I understand Mr. Bartowski wants to make money. It's all about capitalism and making money. And if I'm allowed to do it, I'm going to do it, and kind of tough luck to the community. It's kind of a shame, and it's sad. I did want to add that I think the covenant should be in place to that land no matter what happens. I think that's really important. When Mr. Bartowski made his presentation, he talked about, $2 million stream of income to the township, but in actuality, I mean, as a business person, you really want to look at the net present value of that. I mean, that's how you evaluate business decisions like that, if that's worthwhile. We didn't talk about what is the real net present value of the income stream that's being put forward there. I think that's something that should be shared with the community. And as Tim Caban mentioned, I think it's really important to know that other signs aren't going to be put up in other areas. I mean, that's something that's very important to make sure that we get that handled. And lastly, Mr. Bartowski talked about all these trees that they put into other locations, but I think it's also important to ask the questions about how many of those trees and how long do those trees actually live? I've seen many trees planted in areas, and then they're not tended to or taken care of, and then they just die. So it's kind of a moot point to plant them if they're not properly cared for, watered, nurtured, and to grow in a way that's good for the environment, and also proper trees for the environment in the place that they're being put. So I'm adamantly against having this billboard put in. I think it adversely impacts the environment of 202 and adversely impacts the area of the Chester Valley Trail and our community.
Thank you for your comments. Next, Zach.
Next up, I believe, is Austin Wolfington. Austin, would you like to make a comment?
Yes. Can you hear me okay, Zach?
Yes.
Great. So thanks for the time, everybody. So I have a local small business known as Hunter Durant. We actually happen to be located and have our offices about 2 or 3 minutes down the street from this particular area and the closest 202 exit. I can tell you I'm certainly in favor of this. And I've been watching this for the better part of that kind of half decade that the developers has discussed different ideas and different alternatives for billboard developments in this township. In particular, I think really this is the best option. Reasons for that, I think it's very well thought out, as has been demonstrated throughout this presentation that was presented today, as well as others. There is a thinking towards protecting the open space that is there. Given the circumstances, I really think it's the best option. The monument is really a much better alternative and option in this location versus being on a Route 30 location. I know the township's made efforts in the past few years at the behest of residents and business owners to really have a more aesthetically pleasing Route 30. And I think this achieves that through having one billboard in place of multiple that would otherwise be on Route 30. And in addition to that, this particular developer, if you take a look at their different billboards, which they do a great job of allowing people to have access to online and that type of thing, I really think they are different than other developers in terms of the aesthetics that they do present. Thaddeus had touched upon some of the general nature of even the back of their billboards, the coloring to it, the lack of a catwalk, that type of thing. So I think generally speaking, again, given the alternatives, I think this is the right move for the community.
Thank you, Austin. Next comment is from Ravi Inaganti. I apologize if I mispronounced your last name.
No, you got that right. Thank you, Zach. My name is Ravi Inaganti, which is spelled I-N-A-G-A-N-T-I. Live on 124 Sweetwater Way. This is very interesting. Just moved into the township a little over a year ago, so this is my first township call. So very interesting. Glad to see that there are a lot of involved.
Excuse me, Mr. Inaganti. Could you please slow down a little bit?
Absolutely. Sorry about that. All right. Had a question though. So the rezoning, it sounds like the plan is to rezone 6 plots of land from being open space to being commercial. Not understanding why we have to rezone all 6 of them when the billboards are only going on one of those plots. It would make more sense to me as a layperson to leave the other 5 as open space and tighten it that nothing can be done on there instead of rezoning all of them to be commercial. Not sure if anybody wants to answer that. If not, that's my comment on that. The only other comment I had was the length of the contract of the lease of 30 years. $50,000 might seem like a lot now. 30 years from now, it's not going to mean the same. And even though there's an increase every 5 years, it's not really a lot. And not sure if that's industry standard or if the township should be looking at a shorter lease, just so that if nothing, we can renegotiate better deals from whoever wants to take it over at that point. That's all I had from my side. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next, Zach.
The next comment is from Tony Cianci. Again, I apologize if I mispronounce. Tony, would you like to make a comment?
Sure. Thanks, Zach. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. My name is Tony Cianci. I live in Fetters Mill. I've lived here for 17 years. I sent some emailed comments this weekend to the supervisors. I did hear back from Mr. Lambert. Thank you, Mr. Lambert. And I'm a little late to this party in terms of understanding the history and just been getting up to speed in the last couple of weeks here. I'm very concerned about the growth in the township and the amount of development in general. But this, it seems to me, having listened to this evening and read the materials and a number of materials prior to tonight, that this comes down to an either or between the proposed site in the ecological park and Route 30. And I'm hard pressed to think that if you put this on a referendum and took it to a vote to the township residents, if their choice was, let's put 3 billboards or even 4 billboards on Route 30, which is already, let's face it, a commercialized zone that is what it is. I mean, we all drive on it. We all know what it is. It's got some nice spots. It's got some less desirable spots. It's improving in some areas. It's not in others, but it's a commercial zone versus putting this in an ecological park that, those of us that use Chester Valley Trail will absolutely see when we're on that portion of the trail as we head west toward Mill Lane. The actual potential of it being in the park. I agree with the comments about keeping 202 clear. Again, I wasn't at the Desmond meeting. I'm not sure how this deal has been structured, and it sounds like it's way down the path. But really, from a standpoint of most of the residents, frankly, most of whom are not aware of what's happening and will just see these billboards one day in either of these 2 locations when it comes to be. I personally think most of them would say they'd rather see this stay in the commercial area than be moved to an ecological park, regardless of covenants and zones and $50,000 per year and so forth. So that's how my wife and I feel. I appreciate your time and your comment or your ability to let us make comments on this. And I'll be interested in hearing on how this is resolved. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next up, Zach.
Next up is Mark Zugalski. Mark, can I ask, I believe you also sent an email comment, which we will be getting to here shortly. Would you be okay with your sort of verbal comment taking the place of your written comment in the essence of time?
Hi, Zach. Thank you. Yep, I'd like that read and entered into it, but I'd like to also give you some information now. And thank you all for listening. Actually, a couple things. I'll ask Joe a question in a minute, but first, I think it's a horrible idea, and that's why going back to the beginning, Joe, I think as you explained, but maybe for some of the other audience, how we got there, I think you glossed over how it was bad for the actually zoning ordinance. And then the supervisors on their watch allowed it to transform. And basically, in summary, I think the developer skated from Route 30, and you guys hashed out a great deal, all in favor of the developer. So if you could read the letter, but let me just state, rezoning this is a horrible decision. And I think as your legacy for the supervisors, looking for you to enable this deal is not a good thing. So I think you're flying against what all East Whiteland residents, maybe a few that are on 30. That's why the developer said he had hundreds of people. That doesn't sound right at all. And then actually the taxpayers who actually have you guys working for us. We're not here for you. And I think you made a boneheaded mistake. That's the simplest way I can put it. And I think it's time to maybe step up and say what you've done and call it for that a mistake, letting the developer come in when you guys are on our watch to protect our ground and our land. So looking at the zoning, actually, I think a couple of things are false there, for the health, the safety, and our welfare. And you're taking a park and you're giving it to the developer, which flies totally against the residents and also against the Chester County Planning Commission. So having said all that, the other part, Joe, maybe you could explain how we really got here, how actually, that developer skated from Route 30, how actually the zoning ordinance was changed, and now it got changed back. And now you made some bad decisions, and now you're compounded. So you can read the letter, but thank you for listening. Appreciate it.
Your comments. Next up.
No, Joe, I wanted to ask you something. Basically, how did we get there?
It's not a question and answer period. It's just public comment.
Well, then maybe I should make the comment that basically in the beginning, you stated that the zoning officer or whoever was doing it made a horrible deal to allow signs to be on Route 30. So basically you let the developer fly through, and now you made a great deal where he can be actually on our park. We're not in the business of leasing ground to a developer. And that money stream is a bad deal for any open space. So my comment is, what's wrong with you guys fighting against all the East Whiteland residents when all of us, most of us, Thaddeus, he says that he's got 100 people. I don't see any 100 people. He has a couple people that have standing on Route 30. It just doesn't make sense. Thank you.
All right. Next up.
Okay, next up is Marshall Hoffritz. Marshall?
I can't even comment. The last speaker said it perfectly. I completely agree with him, and thank you. I got to speak to the supervisors that I think this is a bad precedent of what you're doing. The ecology park and open space, you guys have also run on the platform that's essential in our township. In history, my father back here started in the Parks and Rec Committee and made that park. And back then, whatever, 30 years ago, it was a space in which we knew was sacred in the sense that there wasn't that much open space to begin with. We're now in a worse climate with more development coming in, and there's less space. And the idea that we would just sit here and even think about rezoning open space and protect it under a Coventry, I think is just false and bad pretense of what we should be doing. This is an area that, as other people have said, is an area that we should be enjoying. It doesn't matter if you're in Ecology Park or you're running on the trail, you're going to see this sign. It is not a commercial area. It just makes no sense to put this sign anywhere near here. This is a residential area. 202 across this span, and as far as I can see, through East Whiteland, through Tredyffrin, does not have anything like this. We should not be the first group doing this. This is a bad idea, bad precedent. This is happening because the zoning board had a bad ordinance. They got caught on it, and no fault of developer. He's going to see that and say, "Yeah, I'm going to take advantage of it," and that's exactly what happened. Don't do this. The township, as a township supervisors, you report and respond based on the community, and the community is saying overwhelmingly that they oppose this. I was at the last board hearings when there was a discussion about Route 30. There are way more people opposed to this in this location there was even on 30. Even on 30, it's a bad idea. I don't like it, but at least that's a commercial area. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next. I don't want to caution people not to be repetitive. If you agree with prior comments, there's no reason to rehash them. So please.
We absolutely have a right to say whatever, it's our public hearing. We can say that, Joe. That's bad. If I want to repeat what somebody else says, I have every right to do that.
Well, no, actually you don't, but
I do. It is a public forum. Is a public forum, Joe. Who do you represent, us or the developer? Because this is a public space.
Are you done?
I might want to speak
public comment.
On the next part. I might want to speak again.
So next public comment, next hand raise, I should say, is from Steve Aquilani. Steve?
Yes, thank you for the time. I just don't have anything prepared, but am opposed to the plan. I think south of that site, you have dozens of homes on R1 zoned properties where that sign will be visible. So it doesn't matter what you say about being able to read the sign, the light pollution from that sign, the height of that sign, when you look at the topography, will be visible to dozens of homes south and southeast easily. So that's a major concern, being adjacent that R1 zone. Regarding effects on the ecology and wildlife, I think the concern that it's a misrepresentation. That's the exact site you do not want something like this. That's a corridor that has riparian habitat. Hundreds of research studies show that light pollution has adverse effects on wildlife communities. I have a PhD in biology. I teach biology. I've done research for the Forest Service on the effects of ecological disturbance, forest fragmentation on plant and animal communities. So to say there'd be no adverse effects, it flies in the face of what most research says. Now, again, you'd have to research that, but the effects of light pollution on the aesthetics is a guarantee, and then you'll have adverse effects. So I think, it's hard to weigh the pluses and minuses. 30, I think it's a false narrative, 30 versus 202, but if that's it, so be it. But, if you weigh the undeveloped open space, an area that is specifically designed to not include features like this. So I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Excuse me. Sorry, Mr. McGrory. Could you spell your name for me, Mr. Aquilani?
He's muted. According to the screen, it's Aquilani.
Sorry about that. Got it. Good job.
Okay, next we have Kathy Leach.
Hi, thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm Kathy Leach. I'm at 31 Fetters Mill Drive. And I would also like to register my complete opposition to this billboard. I won't rehash the reasons because they've all been spoken, but I will also say that as an economic deal, this is not really worth the paper that it's written on. $50,000 for a billboard of this size with this much traffic over 29 years with a 10% increase every 5 years, it's 2% per year. It's not worth the money for the environmental and the lifestyle impact that it will have on our community. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next.
So I think we've reached the end of all the hands that were raised. I would ask that if anybody else wants to make a comment, please raise your hand now so that we can sort of get an accounting and move on to the email public comments. So with that, I'd ask Brittany to read.
Now, what I'd like to do, Zach, if I may, because we have a second hearing tonight also. We have received a lot of emails, both pro and con, to this proposition. I would suggest that we make all those emails part of the official record and not read them out loud, so we can get on to the second hearing tonight, which we need to begin at this point. But everyone's comments will be part of the official record. They have been received by the board. They have been considered by the board. So I'd like to, at this point, close the hearing if there's no further public comment. Hearing none, we'll close the hearing and we'll start with the second hearing of the night, which is for consideration of the settlement agreement. Now, this hearing is to consider a settlement agreement of a lawsuit that was filed from the developer against the township in the Court of Common Pleas of Chester County. And part of that settlement agreement is to erect a monument sign on the corner of Route 29 and Route 30, and also to eliminate or permanently withdraw the 3 conditional use applications that are pending on Route 30. I'll open the hearing by introducing the following exhibits. Board Exhibit 1 is the legal notice of the hearing. Board Exhibit 2 is the proof of publication. Board Exhibit 3 is the letters to residents who had party status in the conditional use hearings. Board Exhibit 4 is the settlement agreement. And I also do want to note for the record that the township has also served upon adjacent residents and any residents that qualify to get notice under our provisions as if this was a variance. For example, the zoning code says what neighbors get notice if a variance application is filed. We use that provision to notify the same people that would have gotten it if a variance had been filed, because the settlement agreement is tantamount to the granting of a variance. So with that, I'll hand it off once again to Thaddeus Barkowski for a brief presentation. I do want to incorporate into this record my intro in the beginning of the prior hearing that laid out the history of these disputes and how we got to where we are. So with that, Thaddeus, if you'd like to give another presentation, we'd appreciate it.
Yeah, and I'd ask that the same introduction that I used on the first slide from the prior presentation be adopted as the introduction slide for here.
They're incorporated into the record.
Thank you. I wanted to provide a brief overview of the proposed settlement agreement as it relates to the 3 conditional use applications on Route 30. We had filed a conditional use application for 3 locations, one at 323 Lancaster Avenue, the second one at 32 Lancaster Avenue at the intersection of Route 29 and 30, the third at 104-106 Lancaster Avenue. I think it's important to point out for everybody here and township staff that these applications are 100% in compliance with the zoning code that was in place when they were filed. They do not need any zoning relief. They do not need any variances in order to move forward and be constructed. Starting with the location at 29 and 30, the proposed structure in compliance with the ordinance would be a traditional monopole sign structure, 45 feet in elevation with sign faces 300 square feet on either side. This rendering gives you an example of what the sign would look like at that particular location. Second location, 104-106 Lancaster Avenue, more heading towards the western side of Route 30. This structure is supporting the same size sign faces, constructed in the same fashion in compliance with the zoning code when they were, application was made for them. And the third is 323 Lancaster Avenue at the edge of the township on the eastern side, 45 feet in height, 300 square foot sign faces. The settlement agreement process and the objectives, the process was lengthy, it was detailed, and it was exhaustive. Virtually every potential option was considered. That's part of the reason why you see the conditional use hearings being put on hold almost a year to the month ago. And that's because we spent an exhaustive amount of time with trying to come up with a solution that addressed the concerns of township staff as well as the citizens that we heard from throughout the process. It was a highly collaborative fashion. We created multiple designs, made considerable changes to the designs along the way. The primary objectives were to reduce the overall height of whatever structure that got built there. The ordinance permits structures at 45 feet, so we were trying to create something that was safely visible to motorists, but was reduced in height. Second was to create something that had a high aesthetic factor. And the third was to create a landscape buffer in the rear of the monument structure that would be an evergreen buffer that would function not only as a buffer to the back of the sign structure, but additive to whatever existing trees and woodlands existed in the vicinity of where the sign would go. And the end goal was to reduce the number of signs from the 3 in the conditional use to 1. The 1 monument location that is being proposed by means of the settlement agreement that's here for consideration is located towards the east end of 32 Lancaster Avenue at the corner of 29 and 30. The parcel itself right now is a long, somewhat triangular shaped parcel that has a lot of frontage on Lancaster Avenue. The parcel itself and the parcel behind it are wooded. The nature and the health of the woodlands is somewhat suspect. The one thing I would like to point out about this particular location, the design that has been reviewed, discussed, and modified in accordance with the township's request, is that this particular use would allow the majority of the trees on this particular site to remain. We would also be adding additional trees to the site. If another use was to be put on this parcel, it would certainly require the removal of an extensive amount of trees in order to make this odd-shaped parcel feasible. I want to start with and I'm going to stop sharing my screen so a member of our team in another office can share what the design looks like. So if you just bear with us 1 second, Tim, I would ask you to put up the video of the monument itself.
We may need to make Tim a co-host. If our AV folks could assist with that.
Can you see my screen here? Yes, we can. So the design itself we called the Cascades, and the concept was to create a more vertically configured monument display using dry stack stone in a variety of columns, and to incorporate flowing water over the edges of some of those cascades. Now, as Tim can articulate around the model, and just bear with us because it's a very large file and it has to re-render every time it moves. What you'll notice is the configuration of the visual communication technology is in a non-traditional shape. You have the township seal with the water flowing behind it that would be cast out of metal. You have the structure itself comprised of dry stack stone. The structure itself would be located close to the edge of the right-of-way of Route 30. And in addition to the installation itself, there would be an extensive landscaping plan, which I'll show you in more detail in a minute. A landscaping plan calls for the inclusion of 20 different species of plants for a total of 822 individual plantings, whether those be trees, shrubs, or perennials. The key component of creating that evergreen buffer is located immediately behind the installation and before the existing woodlands that is in place at the location. The visual communication technology itself is 511 square feet. It would be comprised of a technology that is different than traditional LED visual communication technology. This technology is referred to as surface mount diodes, or SMD. What that means is the resolution of the images is much greater. And with that increase in resolution, people can get closer to the sign before the image becomes pixelated. That resolution change has no effect on the brightness. It has no effect on how the brightness of the installation is controlled. The overall height of the structure is 35 feet. This is 10 feet lower than what the traditional monopoles would be constructed at. The municipal seal is 4 feet in diameter. The overall depth of the structure is 27 feet, and the overall width at the structure is 27 feet, 10 inches. I see some chats coming up. Somebody asked if that's water. Yes, that would be flowing water. That would be flowing over the edges of those specific verticals of dry stack stone. The setback from the curb on this particular installation would be 10 feet from the edge of the right-of-way. The landscape, the water, the township seal, the architectural lighting, the solar panels that would be incorporated at the top of the display, all of those elements would be subject to an operation and maintenance agreement that we would enter into with the municipality. That O&M agreement requires a amount of money to be placed in escrow that is not insignificant and is directly correlated to the features that the sign has, such as the landscaping and the flowing water. In the event we fail to maintain the sign consistent with the day it was constructed, the municipality has two options at its disposal. they can access the escrow agreement to replace any dead or diseased trees or other plantings at the site, or they have the ability to require us to discontinue the utilization of the installation. We've done an innumerable number of installations with this O&M structure, the first one dating back more than a decade, and no municipalities had to access an escrow agreement in order to restore the landscaping or any of the features at any of our installations. Tim, if you could exit out of this and I can move back to the presentation, please. The main requirements of the settlement agreement, some of them I just touched on, multi-tiered water feature, extensive landscaping, double row of evergreen buffer, 20 different species, 822 plantings. I spoke about the escrow that's required for the maintenance and operation. The requirements in the settlement agreement are to adhere to the same illumination standards that we outlined in the previous hearing, having the sign operate no more than 0.3 foot candles above ambient light level. In this particular vicinity, there's an extensive amount of existing ambient light from neighboring parcels and vehicular lights, and it would obviously require entering into a operation and maintenance agreement with the township. The landscaping plans that we modeled in 3D, you can see here in more detail from the landscape architects. This outlines the species and the plant counts at this particular installation, which we've touched on before. There is a still image of the design itself. The outcome. The goal of this was to create an outcome that took the 3 traditional billboards that were in complete compliance with the township's ordinance and not have those constructed. In lieu of that, it would be the construction of one aesthetically driven monument installation. The second, which was a main driver, was how to reduce the overall height by as much as possible. We were able to reduce it by 10 feet from 45 feet to 35 feet, establish escrows in order to ensure that the installation is maintained as it was when it was constructed, to take the installation and force it to comply with the most advanced illumination standards that were the byproduct of the township's lighting engineer, and is to create a unique monument that specifically was created for East Whiteland and would be limited in its construction to East Whiteland. In addition, this installation, just as the other installation, would be available to the municipality to use once every 2 minutes during the operational hours of the display to communicate with residents and people traveling through the municipality. I can't overemphasize the fundamental fact that after we went through what has been a lengthy process, I've said that, I've alluded to that this evening, we had an information session with, I think, 92 residents in particular showed up to that information session. And we took the feedback from those 92 residents and we tried to embrace every element of that feedback as coming to a consensus as to what would work better in not only the eyes of township staff and the elected officials, but in the eyes of the public. There are existing billboards along Route 30 in this corridor. What is being proposed here is a far better option than just adding more billboards. From our perspective, an installation like this is much more capital intensive. It's obviously only one installation as compared to 3. We're fine moving forward with the 3 monopoles, but this particular solution and the constant focus that township staff and township officials had in the creation of this design to meet the objectives of reducing the number of signs, creating something that was aesthetically driven, reducing the height of the overall installation, and creating something that was unique to East Whiteland is a far better outcome than constructing just another monopole to add to the list of 16,000 that exist in the state of Pennsylvania.
Well, thanks for that presentation, Thaddeus. Anyone on the board have any questions for Thaddeus?
No, I do not on this.
Okay, hearing none, then we'll open up for public comment. Zach, does anybody want to comment?
Hello?
Yeah, you have to unmute.
Where unmute? I did unmute.
So, yeah, whoever you were unmuted. You can go ahead and make your comment. I would just ask that others go ahead and raise their hand and we can call on you one by one. I don't see any hands at the moment, but give everyone just a moment. Martin, if you'd like to go ahead with your comment.
Yes, thank you. I just like to register an objection to the settlement agreement, an opposition. The simple reason that the settlement agreement is interconnected with the rezoning of the Ecology Park and the proposed new sign ordinance. So these are interconnected matters. I registered my objection in regard to the rezoning of the Ecology Park and in regard to the proposed new sign ordinance. I'd like to register my opposition to the settlement agreement as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Thank you, Martin. I guess next, let's go with shown here as Lisa Salamone.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. Is that Paul?
Okay. Yes, this is Paul Salamone. Lisa Salamone's here as well. Just one question I had is,
Tell them what property we are.
we are the owners of the trust property that are directly behind the proposed property for the sign. I mean, the landscaping and everything looks great on the rendering there. There are a lot of dead trees there now, and they continually fall on our side. We've been cleaning them up over the years, and even on our side, there's trees have been there a long, long time. They're trees, and I know we like to keep the tree look and everything, but we want to know what the restrictions would be on our side if we would possibly want to do something on our side in the back of this. Will we be allowed to clear our trees? Does it have to be added to the buffer area that he has? Because we only have a sliver of land back there. We would like to try and maybe in the years down the road, maybe possibly do something with our parcel. How will this adversely affect us to do anything on our parcel? Being, everybody's big on all these, the buffer, it looks like a great landscape plan. I mean, is that going to require us to even add more trees on ours? We're minimized on property back there as it is.
Zach, if I could address that.
Sure.
Yeah, the purpose of Paul and Lisa, the purpose of our landscaping plan with a double row of evergreens at plant height that's as tall as the structure on the parcel that we have an interest in was so that regardless of what happened on your parcel or any of the other parcels behind as it relates to the trees, that the municipality can be assured that there is a buffer on day one and that buffer exists on the subject site. So I can't speak on behalf of the township, but everything associated with the buffer that we're creating by means of the landscaping is specifically isolated to the site, which we have an interest in, so that regardless of what happens on the neighboring parcels with trees in the coming years, the township would still have that buffer.
Okay. I guess I'll have to ask the township that question at the appropriate time then. One other question I have, during construction, will you need access on our side at all to do your project there to minimize your impact on Route 30?
No, we will not.
Okay. All right, because we have the entrance there, right, at we're on the other side of the Bocelli property. We have the entrance there, and we have another entrance up on the Century Plaza side as well. That go back behind there. There is a paved road that goes behind there. I don't know if you're aware of that.
I'm aware.
Okay. All right. Anything else? They're all the questions we have.
Thank you for your comments. Next.
Thank you, Paul. Next up is Gail. Gail Keys.
Hi, Gail Keys. I'm really just some clarification, and maybe Joe is the best one because I think it was in his opening comments for both of these hearings that this question kind of came from. I seem to recall that you said that options were shown to the developer along Route 29, but they weren't interested in any of those. Can you just maybe clarify that comment, or maybe I heard it wrong or forget precisely what you said?
The developer was looking for options. I don't believe he found any other than the walking bridge that we had dealt with him on for a couple of years.
Okay. I'm sorry, then I misunderstood. I was thinking you said there were options, but they weren't interested in any. That's not. Okay. There just weren't any available options along 29.
Not that the developer was interested in.
Well, that's different from any that are available. I mean, there are sites that could be available. They're just not interested.
If I could try and clarify, Gail.
Yes, thank you.
There were no viable options along Route 29 in order to construct a monument display beyond what was explored for a several-year period as it related to the pedestrian bridge.
And viable, that is defined by viable from your perspective, or viable based on legal zoning and frontage and setbacks and all that?
No, viable from an operational perspective.
From your perspective as a business, viable to operate. Got it.
Viable from an operational perspective.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next up, Tim Caban. Tim?
Yeah, I just want to ask one question. I don't know if this is just this particular one of the three, or if we're looking at all three here, but it's the same question for all three, which is, for any of these signs on Route 30, is the township going to enforce 200-85 letter D that says if adjacent to residential zoning districts, signs shall be lit only from dusk to 10 p.m. Why or why not?
We cannot discuss the conditional uses because they're pending hearings, and we can't have any ex parte communication regarding those hearings. Everything has to be done on the record. So the board's prohibited from answering your question at this time.
Fair enough. So if this goes,
Tim, I just wanted to let you know too, sorry to interrupt you. I do apologize for that. I just want to let you know that within the settlement agreement, there are provisions for this sign to be extinguished overnight. And that is, if you want to chime in on that at all, I just wanted to clarify specific to this monument design as part of the settlement.
okay, thank you very much for that, Zach. I just want to then observe and comment, as I did with the last one, that not only is it residents, including myself, that point out that this is adjacent to residential zoning, but the Planning Commission letter also refers to the term adjacent, and they don't use a road like 202 or train tracks like exist behind here as a barrier to the use of the word adjacent. So I would hope that when you go to court that you could actually sue on behalf of the community and uphold that definition, because I'm sure Mr. Barkowski won't agree with that, but I think there are other people that would, and I think you could win in court. So please do that.
To answer your question that Zach prompted on, the settlement agreement calls for this particular monument to be extinguished between midnight and 6 a.m.
Thank you. It's about when it turns off and on at the beginning, not at the end, is my question.
It would turn, as the settlement agreement is currently drafted, it would turn off at midnight and it would turn back on at 6 a.m.
Okay, which is counter to the code, which says it would turn on at dusk and turn off at 10 p.m.
I'm referencing what is in the settlement agreement.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Next up is Mark Zugalski. Mark, would you like to have a comment?
Mark, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hey, thank you. Yep, I just, actually, they are interlinked. And basically, I would say it's to this settlement here with the Ecology Park. I think it's unsound what you guys are all doing. You've created a pickle for yourself. I think you should get that developer to go back to Route 30 with conditional use. And I think Joe should be fighting for our behalf of the township against the developer, not working with him. So total opposition. I think you're not serving the residents or the taxpayers correctly. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next.
So there are currently no hands raised. So just ask if anybody wants to make a comment, they can raise their hand. Mr. McGrory, would you, we have Kathleen Stauffer. Kathleen?
Hi, just a question in regard to the hearing that Joe just mentioned. I live in the General Warren Village, Kathleen Stauffer, and I know that we weren't able to comment in that hearing because I wasn't adjacent to the billboards, so I wasn't party to the party. The hearing that you're speaking of, Joe, are those people who are adjacent to those billboards part of that hearing?
I think you confused me with that. Are you talking about this hearing that we're doing right now?
No, not this hearing. The 3 billboards, the one that was some of my neighbors in the General Warren Village.
Yeah, anyone that was recognized as a party in the 3 conditional use cases were given notice of this hearing tonight.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No other public comment?
Give it just a moment here. I do not see any hands raised at the moment. Would you like to incorporate the emailed comments into the record as well?
Yes, all the emails that boards receive regarding this particular issue will be incorporated into the record. The board's already reviewed the emails and they're familiar with them. So at this point, we'll close this hearing and close this record. Does the board want to break into an exec session? And by the way, I want to announce that before these hearings started tonight, there was an exec session to talk about litigation. Does the board want to break into another exec session before reconvening?
Yes, Joe, yes, I believe we would like to go into an exec session.
How are we going to mechanically do that? Do we go back to the site we had before this meeting?
We should be able to do that, yeah. Let me,
Brittany's still on.
just wants to, I guess, mute. Everyone put their, well, you have to, let me think about this a second, because you'd have to leave this Zoom to go into another one. So I don't know that you could leave this one could be left open.
You could also, may I suggest, Zach, you could do it by conference call via landline or cell phone.
What's a landline?
Yeah, right.
We can,
I still got one of those.
Yeah. Joe, do you may be able to arrange that most easily by cell phone?
I'm
Would you
good
like to do
for
that?
2. I'm good for 2. I'm not sure I'm good for 3.
Okay.
I can try, but I'm probably going to disconnect everyone.
Why don't we do this? Why don't we have everyone mute? You can turn off your cameras, and then if we can formulate a sort of a strategy here. I think that probably the phone is the best way to do that. Let Brittany and I take a moment to just put our heads together on that as well. Sorry to make this more complicated.
Joe, this is Elaine, the court reporter. Do you want me to stay on?
Not for the exec session, but after we come back, if the board takes action, I want that recorded.
Okay.
So what are we doing?
Well, why don't we start with everyone going on mute, and I guess you can turn off the cameras. We'll just basically go on sort of an intermission here, and give me just a moment. Let me get in touch with Brittany. We may be able to set up a Teams or GoTo meeting quickly. So welcome back, everyone. I apologize for the delay there, some technical difficulties. With that, we'll reconvene the meeting.
If I may, to the board and Ms. McGrory, there was two things that I wanted to add on the record. If that'd be possible, I'd be brief.
Okay.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. I wanted to point out that in the conditional use applications, the property owner immediately adjacent to the location of 29 and 30 had entered their appearance in opposition to that monopole being constructed. I was contacted by their attorney, and their attorney was present earlier this evening. There were two things that that property owner needed us to address. One was the location of the monument sign for clarification purposes. The second was fixing a swale that had appeared to be filled in over time to address the drainage on their property. And I would like to point out for the record that they are not here tonight in opposition of the monument. The second thing I want to point out is I want to thank the board for giving us the opportunity this evening and giving us the opportunity over the last year and the last half a decade in working towards a solution as it exists for these installations. I want to let the board know and I want to let the public know that this is not an economic decision for us as the applicant. The better economic decision is for us to build very cost-effective monopoles pursuant to the conditional use application. This is about creating something that took into consideration not only the feedback of township staff and elected officials, but the extensive feedback of the public. We had a lengthy public information session. We had one-on-one meetings and one-on-one phone calls with many members of the public in trying to come to this conclusion that was put forth here this evening. And it's about building something that's interesting. It's about building something that's unique. And it's about building something that, in the case of Route 30, improves the aesthetics along the corridor. In the case of the monopole on 202, it's about adding a outdoor advertising sign structure along a highly trafficked limited access roadway in a very sophisticated and modern way in an area where these types of use belongs. So whatever decision that the board decides to make, know that we'll be happy to move forward if the board wants us to move forward with this more sophisticated alternative, or we'll be happy to move forward with the conditional use application. And in fact, economically, the conditional use application is better for us. It's less capital intensive. But I want to thank the board.
Hello.
Okay. The hearings are now closed, and we've heard from the residents and we've heard from the developer. Is the board prepared to have any motions on what's in front of you? I can list for you the motions and you can go through them one by one. The first one would be to do a map change of the township property from open space to professional office. So is there a motion on that?
I'll make a motion to approve the map change from open space to professional office with the understanding that we will have a covenant placed against that property this evening as well.
Do we have a second?
I'll make a second on that, especially with regard to the covenant.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All not in favor? Aye.
And and you called for public comment on that motion?
And
I think we've already received a lot of
we
public
received
comment.
supervisor comments.
Yeah, I mean, I feel it's necessary to make a comment to give the reasoning behind my choice. This comes down to it's a no-win decision. There will either be upset disappointment on the Route 30 side or the Route 202 side. There are pros and cons. I guess this discussion applies to any future motions too. There are pros and cons to both acts. As far as the Route 202, Route 30 action, better to have 2 signs in the township than 3. I think it's better for the monument sign to have as an entrance to the township, for there to be no other signs in the township. The difference in elevation between the sign and across 202 and what is, well, at least most of the year, heavy, dense vegetation, it looks like it really will be quite a screen or a buffer against seeing the sign itself. Based on the light mitigation, the faces wouldn't be visible anyway, but just to be able to see the sign itself, the visibility would be very much decreased with the vegetation that's across the street. As far as the Route 30 signs, I agree with one comment that Route 30 is already highly commercialized, but I think the impact on Route 30 would be significantly worse with 3 monopoles than having 1 monument sign. On the pros on that, there would be a smaller sign face, which is good, but all things considered, with this is a balancing act. This is how I reach the choice of the 202 and 30. The other factor is, I know there was a comment made on whether this should be conditional use. Any condition that we would put in a conditional use decision purposely was already inputted into the ordinance itself and the settlement agreement for the ordinance itself. All the lighting design language that came from our lighting expert and is part of the ordinance, which would otherwise be conditions of part of conditional use. So we're already putting them in the ordinance itself. And you deserve to know my reasoning behind this difficult decision.
Thanks, Rich. I agree. I agree with everything you've said, and I like the way you've analyzed it. My thought is this has been a very difficult decision. Sometimes we just have to make a decision based on what we think is best overall. We've listened to the residents for almost a year, from the Route 30 residents to the ones closer to 202. We realize that somebody is going to be mad at us no matter what decision we make, but we have to make a decision, and I think we've come to the right one.
I'd like to add that in this whole process, we tried to create an option that provided the least impact on the township. And when it comes down to the pros and the cons, they're pretty close. But the area that swayed me, and I will, before I go there, I will say that there were areas that Catalyst and Thaddeus provided flexibility as we went through this process a number of times and talked with him. That I appreciated from him. But what ended up swaying me to the negative was the elevation of the sign on 202, its height, and the public opposition that stated their opposition tonight. But it was very close.
There's some other motions that the board will need to take action on. The next motion would be to adopt the text change amendment to the professional office district.
Right, which is also considered the regular ordinance. So I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make that motion to adopt the text ordinance change.
Do I have a second?
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Not in favor? Aye.
Was that not in favor?
That was not in favor.
Okay.
Nay.
The next motion is to authorize the manager to sign the declaration requiring that the open space parcels remain as open space in perpetuity.
I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to authorize the township manager to sign the settle agreement to make the open space, the newly rezoned open space, open in perpetuity. I hope I said that properly.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Any public comment? Seeing none, you can vote.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Nay.
And the next one is to execute a lease that's been proposed for the township property to install one billboard.
Do I hear a motion to entertain?
I'll make a motion to adopt the lease.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
And one comment on the lease also, the lease also includes many conditions that would otherwise be part of any conditions attached to a conditional use approval or other approval. So everything that we could get, lighting, testing the lighting, we have the right to send our lighting expert several times a year unannounced to check the illumination to make sure it's being done properly. So everybody's aware of that.
And this motion would be to have the township manager execute the lease?
That's correct.
And was there a second?
I'll second.
Any public comment? Seeing none? Your vote?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Against?
And then the next one is to authorize the township solicitor to sign the settlement agreement.
Can I entertain a motion for that?
I'll make a motion to authorize the township solicitor to sign the settlement agreement.
All in favor?
You want a second?
Oh, yeah.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any public comment? Hearing none, then a vote?
Aye.
Aye.
Against?
Anything else, Thaddeus?
I do not have anything else. Thank you for the time.
Okay, I want to thank the audience for their participation, and their comments were taken into consideration by the board. And I mostly want to thank everyone for presenting themselves in a courteous and polite manner. So with that, we'll adjourn the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.